Thanks. Amazing. Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome. My name is Desiree Wenz. I'm a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, studying mass communications, and today I'll be giving a presentation called Crash Course American Propaganda. I'm very proud of my PowerPoint here. Oop. Okay, so just some goals for this session. I'm going to do about a 20 to 30-minute presentation, but really I want this to be more like a conversation. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to bring them up because we'll be going through some really interesting topics and I'd love to hear what you guys all think of them. Then we'll go through a couple of discussion questions. And then at the end, I have some book recommendations for you. And my ultimate hope for this is that you'll understand how America has historically used propaganda to justify and erase its past and present terror, and for all of us to know that what is happening now, while it is very scary, is nothing new. So, with that, I want to start with a question for all of you. Um, Oops, someone just came in. Limit them. Hi, Jessica. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Sorry for
Yeah,
being late.
no, it's all good. Thanks for coming. We just
Yeah.
started with a question that I want everyone to kind of discuss. I know propaganda is kind of a hot topic right now, but what is our understanding of propaganda? Like, what is propaganda as we understand it?
My understanding is that it is any form of media or communication that um, benefits a certain viewpoint, particularly politically, um, and tries to influence you towards that viewpoint.
Yeah, pretty much. Anyone else want to comment or, oop, go back.
Yeah, I think that one definition from the years ago, that I remember is something like something that is trying to influence you to do something you would not be doing otherwise. But
Hmm.
in my mind, it's still connected too much um, to governments, whereas I don't think it actually is. I think it's also governments, companies, corporations, all kinds of things, advocacy lobby groups, all.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Okay, so before both of you guys are pretty much correct. Before we talk about specifically American propaganda, I wanted to share this old Soviet joke that I heard a long time ago, which will be relevant for explaining how exactly American propaganda works. So it goes: a KGB agent and a CIA agent meet at a bar in Kiev. The CIA agent compliments his colleague. It's amazing what you've been able to do with propaganda in the Soviet Union. It's the best I've ever seen. The KGB agent laughs and says, "Thank you, my friend, but our propaganda is not nearly as effective as America's." Disgusted, the CIA agent responds, "What are you talking about? America doesn't have propaganda." So the joke here, of course, is that America does have propaganda, but we don't necessarily see it as propaganda, and that is the entire goal of it. So moving on to the definition of propaganda as we'll be using it for this discussion. Gwen and Georgie pretty much covered it perfectly. Propaganda is the use of intentional messaging to influence the beliefs, emotions, identity, and actions of a population. American propaganda relies on media, ritual, and the retelling or reframing of history to convince us that there is no propaganda, only the exceptional destiny of propaganda, as we'll see through the few historical examples that we'll go through. And I'm not a historian, I'll just say that beforehand. I'm looking at these historical moments and at the media perpetuated at each of those moments to show you how propaganda has been used in that moment and afterwards when we learn about the history of those moments to get us to believe this overarching narrative about America's exceptionalism. Okay, so just a few more terms to further explain the difference between disinformation and propaganda. Disinformation is deliberately false, and the goal of it is to deceive. while propaganda can use truth or lies to promote a certain belief or action, as you were both saying earlier. So propaganda can say something that is true, like, for example, America enslaved Black people. But depending on the way you spin it, it can promote a certain belief or action. Like if I were to say America enslaved Black people, but it was for the benefit of Black people, that's a form of propaganda that's meant to get you to believe a certain belief about a true fact in history. The main goal of propaganda is to persuade through repetitive methods of media or ritual. The difference between education and propaganda is that good education should encourage you to think critically, and propaganda wants you to just believe something straight up. It's meant to instill a collective response or belief. So if you are propagandized to believe America is the best country in the world, therefore you should defend it, that is the collective response intended by that propaganda. As George was saying, propaganda can come from a government, an organization, or even an individual, like a podcaster. While typically seen as a negative concept, it is actually a neutral term. So propaganda isn't only made by dictatorships. It can come from a variety of places for a variety of purposes. So even resistance movements use propaganda to get change and inspire people to fight for a certain goal. Its methods primarily rely on appealing to emotions, pride, fear, anger, etc., to manipulate perspectives on reality or history. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm not cutting out or anything, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Amazing. All right. So now let's move on to the fun stuff. Okay. So our first little bit of historical propaganda is the Philippine-American War from the late 1800s, 1899 to 1902. And this happened after the Spanish-American War, during which, of course, Spain and America went to war. And as a result, America annexed Guam, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and it also took Hawaii as a territory, and it took Cuba. Um, and this was the beginning of the United States becoming an imperial power. Has anyone heard the phrase the white man's burden? Yeah,
I
okay.
have not.
Okay. Well, The White Man's Burden it was a poem written by Rudyard Kipling in 1899. And if Rudyard Kipling sounds familiar, it's because he's the guy who wrote The Jungle Book. But he was also super racist. And he wrote The White Man's Burden as a piece of propaganda to basically say that it was the duty of white men to save brown and black people from themselves, to civilize them in a way. And this political cartoon here on the right is of Uncle Sam, who represents America, and John Bull, who represents Britain. And they're carrying these Asian and Black people who are stereotyped very grotesquely up this mountain to civilization. There's a peak at the top of the mountain called Civilization. And this painting was called The White Man's Burden, which was directly emulating Rudyard Kipling's poem, which was calling up white men to take up arms and go and spread liberation and democracy and civilization to the rest of the world, which sounds very familiar to us. This was used specifically in 1899 to justify the American colonization of the Philippines. And the rhetoric from the presidency at the time, from President McKinley, sounds very familiar to what we hear later on. We come not as invaders or conquerors, but as friends to protect the natives, replacing arbitrary rule with the mild sway of justice. So if you remember America saying, we're spreading freedom, we're spreading democracy, this is very similar to what they were saying back in 1898. So instead of colonization, which they condemned Spain for, they say we're not invaders or conquerors like Spain. We're liberators. We're coming to bring justice and democracy. But at the same time, they portrayed Filipinos as being incapable of governing themselves and uncivilized. And the response to this was from Emilio Aguinaldo, who was a Filipino resistance fighter who knew how white Americans saw him and his people. And he wrote in this letter called An Appeal to the American People, you have been deceived. You have been greatly deceived in the personality of my countrymen. You went to the Philippines under the impression that their inhabitants were ignorant savages. But of course, this doesn't serve America's narrative. So this letter was largely ignored. And this type of propaganda relies on stereotypes, and we all know what stereotypes are, assuming a group of people are a certain way because of what they are, and glittering generalities, which are using words that sound good, like liberty, justice, democracy, but in reality, you're just using those words to cover up what you're actually doing. Okay, so on to the next. Oops. Hello. Okay. So next, this one should be familiar for all of us who grew up in America. And kind of to make my point, does anyone want to say the Pledge of Allegiance? Or maybe we can all say it together.
I pledge of
Pledge
allegiance
allegiance
to
To
the
the
flag
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 of the
of
of
the
the
United
United
States
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 of
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 America
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 and to
and
the
and
to
to
the
the
republic
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 for
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 which
which
it
it
which it
stands,
stands,
one
stands,
one
nation,
one
nation,
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 under
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 God,
under
God,
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 indivisible,
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 with
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 liberty
liberty
and
and
liberty
justice
justice
for
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 all.
all.
all. Okay, is that not insane that we all remember that? Okay, so that's like the next part that I want to talk about here. The Pledge of Allegiance was initially written in 1892 by the socialist Baptist preacher named Frank Bellamy. And he wrote it claiming that pledging allegiance would ensure that the distinctive principles of true Americanism will not perish as long as free public education endures. Once again, this sounds great, right? Free public education, which of course is great. But the fact that this pledge was written in order to ensure that these principles of Americanism would not perish speaks to this as a form of propaganda. And the fact that it's required in most public schools also speaks to this. Um, and it also contributes to these phrases that we learn later, like "God bless America" or like "under God," that was specifically added in 1954 by President Dwight D. Eisenhower during the Cold War to distinguish America from godless communism. So once again, it's creating these opposites, right? Because we are blessed by God, everyone else is demonized, literally demonized, the godless communists. And that's why we assert that we are a country under God. Um, does anyone want to read out loud this quote from Dwight D. Eisenhower on the right?
From this day forward, did you want to? I'm so
No,
sorry.
yeah, please, anybody.
Okay. From this day forward, the millions of our school children will daily proclaim in every city and town, every village and rural schoolhouse, the dedication of our nation and our people to the Almighty. To anyone who truly loves America, nothing could be more inspiring than to contemplate this redictation of our youth on each school morning to our country's true meaning.
Right. So super familiar, right? This dedication of our nation to Almighty, to anyone who truly loves America. Like I also find it very creepy that he says this dedication of our youth, like as if we're sacrificed in some way, on each school morning to our country's true meaning, right? Like evoking this sense of trueness, of truth, of loving, of God and the divine. And this is a form of propaganda that's called ad nauseum, which is literally in Latin means to nausea. Uh, and this is supposed to represent how repetition shapes identity. And I want us to notice specifically the words within the Pledge of Allegiance. It's I pledge allegiance to the flag, to a symbol, right? So, in associating this sense of divine truth to a flag, a piece of cloth, it's creating an association of that symbol with our very identity. And this is why, as we'll talk about later, why people get so offended when people don't respect the flag properly, because they've been propagandized to see that flag as part of their identity. And just to speak further into the fact that not only do we all remember the Pledge of Allegiance, but Frank Bellamy himself said about the pledge in 1923, this little formula has been pounding away on the impressionable minds of children for a generation. And that was basically like his pride and glory, was the fact that he came up with this pledge that we all remembered later, like 100 years later. So just to demonstrate literally the psychological impact of propaganda lasts for generations. Oh my God. Okay. Oh my God, next. Sorry. It's like, okay. So now everyone's still with me. We're still good. Just send a thumbs up if you are. Okay, perfect. So now we move on to a literal propaganda film made in 1944. This was called The Negro Soldier, and it was commissioned by the US War Department in 1944 to inspire recruitment from Black soldiers. And they did this because they knew that Black people were sick of racism in America. So they made this film to inspire Black people to sign up for the Army anyway. And it's and for the film people, you'll find this very interesting because it's framed through a Black pastor who's talking to his congregation about the war going on between America and Europe. And he's telling them about the heroic efforts of Black soldiers during the Revolutionary War, War of 1812, and the Civil War. And it also uses something called transfer propaganda, which is basically when you take two images and put them together to create an association between them. So it uses this to talk about the US Army being a place where you can have fun and still learn pride and discipline. And I want to show you a clip from this movie, and I hope it'll play. And I just want you to think about how it presents history, specifically Black people in American history. Okay, I'm gonna play like a couple seconds of it, but let me know if it's actually going through.
Country shall your Whipple swore the people of the New World won their independence. They joined hands, and 13 colonies became the United States. Then the people of the new republic began to build. Together, they pioneered.
Oops. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Won their independence. They joined hands, and 13 colonies became the United States. Then the people of the new republic began to build. Together, they pioneered, and together they made territories into states. By 1812, a wilderness was becoming a great nation. Then came war. At Lake Erie, Tyler Thompson heard Admiral Perry's immortal words, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." And in New Orleans, when General Jackson said, "By the eternal they shall not sleep on our soil," Thomas Wilson was there. America began to build ships. Then came 1861. That government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. With malice toward none, with charity for all. Then America began to rebuild.
Okay, were you guys able to hear it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, what do we notice about the way it recounts the 1800s?
I thought it was like interesting how they showed like the like Black people as part of that sort of like Western migration that like took place, and they were like really happy and like smiley, and that just seemed really intentionally false.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially since you don't see that, I guess this would be a little bit early for the Western genre, but like you definitely don't see that in any Westerns like in the 50s.
Right. Exactly. it's like inviting, it's saying that, oh, Black people have always been part of like this American destiny, right? But like, what else do they specifically omit?
I mean, I found it interesting that like, you know, they touch on the Civil War, but they don't obviously mention anything about slavery. Um,
Right.
and I'm not entirely sure like how far to the present they were trying to go, but you know, like there's definitely a lot of like events that they gloss over.
Exactly. And it says right, like it just says 1861 war, and it doesn't say the Civil War. It doesn't even mention slavery. Nowhere in this film does it mention slavery at all. It's just kind of like, oh, Black people have always been a part of this country. Black people fought in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. And then the clip after this, it actually shows a Black man going to his friends and he says, hey, I'm joining the army. I'm going to Cuba, which we just learned earlier was a colonial project of the United States. So it's saying like Black people are able to participate in American colonialism because they've always been a part of it. Yay. And it completely ignores what the country has done to Black people, right? It doesn't even reference how Black people got here in the first place. So that's just another example of how American propaganda, specifically this propaganda, omits the realities of slavery and of what America has done to people of color, just to reassert this kind of colorblind narrative. I actually found it. This whole thing is on YouTube, by the way. It's only 40 minutes long, and it almost drove me insane because I had to watch it, taking notes. But yeah, it's a really interesting film to watch all the way through, if you're interested further in propaganda. Okay, so next one, the war on drugs, which arguably is going on to the present. So in 1971, Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs as a national emergency. So once again, using very provocative language, the word war kind of gives us this mental image of battles and soldiers and fighting and victory. But we're not fighting against another country, right? We're fighting against drugs. And when you also add the phrase national emergency, it also adds the sense of urgency. However, John Ehrlichman, who was Nixon's domestic policy advisor at the time, would say later that we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the Vietnam War or Black. So they used the war on drugs to create this campaign of fear mongering, right? So they had the DEA was the Drug Enforcement Agency came about in the 70s, and the DEA, the FBI, and the CIA would go and invade Black communities and anti-war communities, and they were justified in doing this because of the fear mongering against drug users at the time. Now, in the 80s, the Reagan administration used television to push anti drug rhetoric. So you might remember Just Say No, or Pee Wee Herman when he says, "This is your brain on crack," and he cracks an egg into a pan. So both of these were used to villainize drug use and also to reduce drug abuse to individual responsibility. And addiction can be very complex. There's plenty of reasons why somebody might be addicted to something, but the point of this rhetoric was to reduce addiction to just a moral, personal failure, right? Like just say no. Getting off of drugs is as easy as just saying no. And if you can't do that, then it's your own fault. So this combination of tough on crime and anti-drug media used fear mongering to justify harsher punishments against nonviolent drug abuse. So because you were not able to say no, it's your own fault. Therefore, you deserve a harsher and longer punishment or sentence. And another thing that came about here was the reputation of certain drugs. So the reputation of crack led to more individuals of color being convicted for drug related crimes, even though crack was just a cheaper version of cocaine, which is more available to white people. But crack was associated as being a more volatile, destructive, violent drug. And because it was in Black and Brown communities, those people were also seen as being more volatile and violent. And it shifted perceptions ultimately of who was a drug user. So this researcher or she referenced a poll where people were asked to describe their image of a drug user, and 95% of them described a Black man. So that goes to show the effects of media and propaganda, domestic propaganda, on shaping how we see people and who we think deserves certain punishment. Okay. Oh my God. Okay, so next one. So my final historical example will be probably more recent to our political memory, and that's the Iraq War. So after 9/11, there was George W. Bush declared the war on terror, which is similar to the war on drugs, in which we were claiming to fight against against just the idea of terror, which was mostly concentrated towards the Middle East and Afghanistan. But in 2003, the Bush administration decided to invade Iraq, overthrow the president Saddam Hussein, and instill its own government there. And to do this, the Bush administration portrayed Saddam Hussein as a madman. They compared him to Hitler. They referred to him as a thug and a terrorist. Both words are typically racially associated with Black men and Muslims, basically villainizing him. And he was a bad guy. Like, Saddam Hussein was not a great person, but they did this specifically to justify invading Iraq. And this was effective because in 2003, 69% of Americans believed Saddam Hussein was personally involved in the 9/11 attack, even though he had nothing to do with it. And 82% believed Saddam provided assistance to Osama bin Laden. And another form of propaganda that was very prominent at this time was called testimonial propaganda. And testimonial propaganda is when a trusted political figure or public figure, someone just came in the meeting room. Okay, so testimonial propaganda is when a trusted political figure says something, and we believe that it must be true because it's coming from this figure, right? Like a president or a secretary of state. This is someone we are supposed to trust. So this picture is of Secretary of State Colin Powell, and he went to the UN with a bottle of anthrax, which was supposed to be proof that Iraq had nuclear weapons. And he said they had this bottle as proof that this is why we need to go in and take out Saddam and invade. But of course, there were no nuclear weapons. We know that now. And looking back on this moment, Colin Powell would say that this was a blot on his career. You know, of course, he will not admit to being a tool of propaganda because, well, America doesn't have propaganda. We just make innocent mistakes that lead to war and the deaths of thousands of people. So, moving on. Everyone is still with me. Everyone can still hear me. Okay, I have been traumatized in the past by Zoom quitting on me, so I have to keep asking. Okay, so now we'll move on to American propaganda today. And what we're going to talk about is going to sound very familiar to the last few historical examples that we just discussed. So this picture is a clip from an educational website called PragerU, and they are currently in partnership with the White House they say that they're teaching honest and accurate history. And this clip is from an episode where Christopher Columbus explains that slavery is better than killing people. So, yeah, literally. He literally says, well, being enslaved is better than being killed, right? So, and then they have another episode where Frederick Douglass is talking to these kids, and he says that slavery was a necessary compromise for the United States to be what it is. So both of these are examples of how American propaganda reframes slavery and colonialism as compromise or even a necessary evil. And it claims to be colorblind or to be for all Americans, while minimizing the real historical experiences of people of color. So people might say things like all lives matter or we're all Americans and explicitly ignore what people of color have been going through in the past and presently. And a part of that is minimization, which is also a technique of propaganda. By minimizing the actual reality of what's going on, it's basically saying it's not that important or that people are focusing on it too much, which is where we get the other phrase, facts over feelings, which we hear a lot in conservative circles. And this appeals to a sense of superiority, right? Like we care about facts, we don't care about feelings. The fact that, and this is meant to once again, minimize the real history that people of color have been through as just feelings, as something that shouldn't be taken seriously because you feel hurt over what your people went through. It doesn't matter as much. Even though slavery is a fact, colonialism is a fact, war is a fact, but they use this to justify themselves over the real experiences of others. Then this is another example. This is actually from the Instagram page of the Department of Homeland Security and the White House. It literally shows a propaganda painting by John Gass called American Progress, which features a giant white woman moving into the western parts of the United States, literally driving out the darkness on the left and the Native Americans. So subliminally associating those two with each other, and bringing in civilization to the western part of the United States. And the caption from the DHS says, "A heritage to be proud of, a homeland worth defending." So once again, minimizing the real experiences of natives, upholding the sense of superiority, and this white Christian definition of who is a real American. And in contribution to this colorblind America, it also creates these strange false equivalences. So I've seen people like compare Charlie Kirk to Martin Luther King. And that's another thing about propaganda. It creates these very shallow logics. Like, because Charlie Kirk and Martin Luther King both fought for freedom and were Republicans or conservatives and were assassinated, that means that they are one and the same or the same figure. And they're not. They stood for completely different things. But in order to minimize the real protests of people of color and to uphold that other white Christian narrative, they create this false equivalence to remove the power of Martin Luther King from the Black and brown people that he advocated for. So in doing so, it frames murder, invasion, and repression as justice and self-defense of values and culture. So as we saw during the Philippine-American War, it says all these good things, right? But in reality, that's just to cover up the actual damage that they're doing. And then also, so these are a few other screenshots from the DHS using shallow logics. Says even ET knew when it was time to go home, talking to illegal migrants and literally comparing them to actual aliens from outer space to justify kicking them out or giving them the chance to go home before they are forcefully removed. Then Join ICE Now, which is a more like war propaganda type of poster. Greatness is a choice, as we spoke before about this idea of individual responsibility, that it's upon yourself to go out and make America a better place or live up to America's standards. Literally displaying strength with his bicep out. And then finally, this poster of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and putting him in the same design as the Obama posters, even though Obama hasn't been president for 10 years, but still somehow blaming him and subliminally blaming liberals or Democrats or whatever for what is currently happening or what they think is currently happening. So all of these are examples of appealing to logic or appealing to like this very shallow logic or appealing to emotion to get whoever is seeing this to continue to believe in their version of America. So once again, just putting the definition here: propaganda is the use of intentional messaging to influence beliefs, emotions, identity, and action. And then the final point I want to make here is that those who reject or challenge the narrative are considered not real Americans, but they are also used to reinforce existing propaganda about what it means to be a true American. So I have a picture here of Colin Kaepernick. We all remember during the 2020, 2021, when he knelt during the national anthem, which is a ritual during American sports events where most people stand up and sing the national anthem and put their hand over their heart. But he refused to in protest of unarmed Black men being murdered by the police. And people called him a not real American. They said he was disrespecting the flag and disrespecting the country. And once, like we said during the Pledge of Allegiance, right? I pledge allegiance to the flag. This flag is a symbol of identity for so many people, and that's why they became so offended by it. And it also reinforced this idea that they had to protect the flag, that they had to stand for stand for the flag, kneel for the cross, or something like that. So they just use people like Colin Kaepernick. They invalidate the real protests of people of color, and they use it to reinforce what they already want to believe about what's going on. And at the same time, continue to assert that there is no propaganda in America. And we also see this as well with the recent murder of Renee Good in Minneapolis. Her death was blamed on herself because of the culture of individualism within America, which blames you for your own moral failures rather than acknowledging the systemic issues that are upheld by propaganda. They blamed her for her own death because she did not comply, or because she was a liberal, or because she wasn't a real American and didn't act the way that she was supposed to. Um, okay, so just like some things to remember, because I know, like I said, propaganda is a very hot word right now. Questions that we should ask ourselves as we consume media. One, who is telling the story? Where is the story coming from? Two, what emotions are triggered by this narrative? How do I feel? Do I feel happy, sad, angry? Do I feel like a sense of superiority? Like, oh, at least I'm not like that person. At least I believe this or whatever. And then finally, to whose benefit is it that I believe and act on this narrative? Because as Gwen and Georgie mentioned earlier, the point of propaganda is to get you to believe something and therefore act on that narrative, to protect a symbol, to go out and fight against your neighbor, to join ICE or the army or whatever, or to continue to believe that America is the best country in the world and therefore it can do no wrong. Okay, I did a lot of talking. Are there any questions for me?
I am curious, but I don't quite know how to word it because the Trump propaganda, especially like this term, um, seems to have like escalated but devolved. As you were saying, like very, very shallow logic and just like a lot of doubling down. And um, the best way I can word it is that it almost doesn't even fully feel like propaganda anymore as much as it is like a, the kinds of tactics you see in like abusive families. And I just wonder like what purpose that serves him, like because I've always thought of propaganda as being much more like um intentional.
Yeah, I was going to put in this presentation that propaganda really is a form of collective narcissism. So your comparison to abusive families is very accurate because narcissism relies on affirming the reality of that narcissist, right, and validating the experiences of everyone else. And when you talk about intention, that's it's interesting because I see what you mean by like propaganda should seem more intentional. Like we can see obviously like where it's coming from, right? Or what the goal of it is. But what's unique about American propaganda, or actually this applies to all propaganda, is that really it's just building off of something else. So the reason why it doesn't seem intentional at the moment is because it's just building off of what was already there. So we already have like or conservatives and Republicans and Trumpers already have this understanding of America being the best country in the world, which is a narcissistic take in itself. But it's becoming, like you said, it is becoming more extreme, and they are doubling down. And at the same time, it's becoming more stupid and less sensical because it's just building off of this delusion that we've had for the last 2 centuries.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. Yeah. I'm just like, it's funny, yeah, because coming at it from the film lens, it's like you study the old stuff and it's like, you kind of see like if like when you watch oh frick, what was Lenny Riefenstahl's film called? Like
Uh, oh my
Triumph
God.
of the Will.
that's
Yeah.
it, yeah. Like, and maybe this just speaks to, how insanely fast information moves now, right? Like, it just like it feels like you can kind of see like, okay, this is what they're trying to like the point that they're trying to get across, right? Or like they're trying to get Black people to enlist in the army, right? Like, whereas now I'm like, I don't even know a lot of what the point is anymore, except as you said, to just buoy up this narcissist.
Yeah, yeah, I see what you mean. Triumph of the Will seems like way more obvious when we're looking at it now. Um, but I suppose like within the Nazi German context, it was kind of just saying something that had already been established, if that makes sense. And that's kind of like how where we are in America with propaganda. Like I said, the Pledge of Allegiance. We all know the Pledge of Allegiance off the top of our heads. Like everything that's happening now is kind of just built on that. And at the same time, they just use different words that don't exactly say what they're actually doing, like justice, democracy, liberation, freedom, homeland, or whatever. That sound good, but they're actually not. Um, there's a really interesting quote from Andrew Jackson when he was talking about the Trail of Tears, I think it was. And they knew that they couldn't go in and just start murdering people. I mean, that's what they did anyway, but they had to dress it up in these legal terms in a legal way. So they made treaties with the Indians or the Native Americans. And Andrew Jackson told his people, do indirectly what you cannot do directly. So that's why they use like all these other words and narratives to dress up what they're actually doing. So it doesn't seem like propaganda. It seems like, oh, well, this is just democracy or this is just a bureaucratic process. But that's just to get you to believe that what's happening is normal or that there is no propaganda, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating because I've been having a uniquely tough time trying to write comedy and satire about this because I can't even like latch on to anything, it feels, you know?
Yeah, that's a very prominent feature in authoritarianism and totalitarian studies. In 1984, I think George Orwell says like the party told you not to trust the evidence of your eyes and ears. Like there's because there is nothing to latch on to, you know, if they say one thing one day and then something completely different the other, or if everything is liberation or democracy or whatever, then what does that actually mean anymore? Which is why like I want to reiterate that we should pay attention to the words that we are saying and reading and learning and understand what they actually mean historically and presently. And I would also love to see a sketch on all of this to help us make sense of this.
Mhm. I think it's interesting too because I have like being black and then having family members like who hate it here and hate everything that's going on here, but they also can't envision or don't envision like moving anywhere else because the idea of like, okay, this place America like sucks for like um through slavery and everything else terrible going on, but it's still like there's this idea still in their heads. And sometimes like even before with me too, with how I haven't gone anywhere else, that what other place gets as better as here, which sounds absolutely terrible. And it's like you hear in places like Switzerland and like how women can have like a year off if they have a baby, and it's like you hear little things like that, and you're like, okay, cool, but then. If I go there, will I be the only black person or will they like black people over there? And so I think it's just like this circle of just stuckness and it's like even if there are things you don't like about being in America, it's still I feel like had an effect where you still hold it up higher than you may even want to without even realizing it sometimes if you don't take a look at your own thoughts about it.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot too from my family members. They're like, why would we go anywhere else? And it's like, because the world is bigger than America. And I do question if that is like, if that is propaganda or if that is just this idea that you know, where else can we as African Americans go when we're not necessarily African anymore? But America has also always treated us terribly. So, like, where else is there to go? And there's a really interesting book called Lose Your Mother that gets into that, where it talks about like,
Mm.
where African Americans belong and like deconstructing this romanticized idea of Africa and at the same time understanding what America has actually done to Black people without omitting it or dismissing it like it does in the Negro Soldier. Um, So that'd be interesting if you want to check that out. And I'll also say, as someone who went to high school in Europe, they're bad over there too. And I think all countries have propaganda, one way or another. So I think really, as long as you're able to think critically and understand like what you want, like then you can find a place to live. Just as long as you understand that America isn't all there is.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Kind of on that thread of like different countries, I actually had a question, sort of going back to the discussion from like the Pledge of Allegiance. And you were talking about how like in America there's sort of like this, I guess like socialized and also like more like subliminal psychological idea of like connecting the identity to like the flag. And I was wondering if you like have like looked in like how that I guess is in like other countries too, because I've heard like some things maybe on like how that's like a really like standout in the US, but like other people don't think so as much. So just as somebody who I guess like I feel like you've traveled a lot or like maybe you've like read on other things, like what does that I guess look like in comparison to like other countries and like their relationship to their flag? Like is it something that stands out in the US or do you think that's like also something that happens in other countries a lot?
I'll say like that's a good question. A while ago, I read this memoir of a Black woman who grew up in North Korea. And she spent her whole life in North Korea and then came to America. And she said that the Pledge of Allegiance was one of the creepiest things she'd ever seen in her life. And that's coming from someone from North Korea. So to me, like, I feel like this obsession with the flag, I can't speak to other countries. I know in Germany, it was like, I don't think there was that much I don't think people care that much about like the German flag. If anything, the Germans were like, we're not nationalistic at all. Like you only saw the German flag like when the World Cup was happening, and all other times, like maybe the flag was on a post or something, but nobody was going around waving it around the way they do here. And Lithuania, they took out the flag. They would wave it around on their independence days, and they have like four of them because they were freed from the Soviet Union, which makes sense. But from my understanding, there's not as much of a, at least from where I've been, there's not as much of a, what do I even call it? Not parasitic, I guess obsessive relationship with the flag as there is in the United States. Um, but I don't know that quote from the North Korean woman still sticks to me a lot. So I guess I would say that.
What's that book called? Sorry.
Yeah, it's called Black Girl in Pyongyang. And her story is really interesting because she was actually the daughter of the dictator of Equatorial Guinea, and she was raised by Kim Jong Il after her father was executed. So it was honestly, I think that book is also propaganda, but her discussion of America versus North Korea is really fascinating, especially as a Black woman. So I definitely recommend it. I only have a few minutes left, but these were some discussions questions that I thought might be interesting. What other narratives in American culture do you think may be a product of propaganda? And if you're not American, how is America portrayed to you in media or in class? And then Americans, how was that country portrayed to you, or was it portrayed at all?
Oh, oh, did oh go ahead, Bo.
Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna head in the work in a sec here, but I just want to so like going off the first point, I there definitely is like this sense of like this American mythos of like the American dream and how like this is like this how America is built to work, where it's like you can come over and you can basically kind of like make, basically kind of like crawl yourself out of like poverty or whatever kind of like situation you're finding yourself in your like your home country or whatever. So like that kind of like American dream mythology, like even nowadays you still see like meritocracy is basically passed around like the like truth, right? Like you were saying earlier in the discussion, like, if you find yourself addicted to drugs or find yourself homeless or in poverty, it's like your own fault. So like breaking out of that like kind of meritocracy framework, like like would it be like counter propaganda to kind of like, you know, kind of go against it? I don't know. I'm talking about a bunch of different things here, but you kind of see where I'm coming from. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's a good point. Does anyone else have a comment on that?
I mean, it's something that I've definitely felt lately because I want meritocracy to be true, but I don't think it is. Um, and I think it kind of ties into what Amaya was saying though about like why it's so hard to leave the US because it's such a powerful dream. You know, I see it on the Cuban side of my family, and also them being uh, incredibly racist immigrants, like even cementing their place over like, but we're like older immigrants, so like we did it the right way, you know, which is like what. Um, but yeah, I think it's like fascinating how potent it is that like, oh, you just on your own hard work, you'll just get there, you know.
That's so interesting. Like, but when as soon as you like what you're talking about, Gwen, and then Bo, when you brought up the American dream, and um, just thinking about it now, or just always not necessarily wanting to think about it, but it's like if I, especially on social media, TikTok, whatever, people be like, oh, I started here, then I blew up, and I'm rich, and I'm this, and I'm that, and it's like it's like the American dream seems like excessive. Like it's to each person and what, their dream is, but it's like this, it seems like now more than anything, it's like having this excess amount of money, excess amount of fame. I just want to live comfortably. I just, that's all I want. I just want what I need and a little bit for what I want.
Right.
But it seems less and less obtainable just for, and so it's like, I don't know. It's like being at a weird place where it's like I need that self-motivation to keep myself going, but I'm also like, I guess looking around and I'm like, is even the bare necessity even achievable? Like, and so this idea of the American dream kind of like crumbles up because it's like, yeah, it is just a dream because it's not like in some cases tactile. At least it feels like it, if I explain that okay. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of, I mean, at least in my the way I understand it, I think that's a lot of on all political sides, like what is driving a lot of um, the derision uh, is that the dream feels unattainable, and everyone has a different reason for why. Uh, it's super fun to live through, as we all know.
Yeah, even with working, um like being in a business where they're about to close our shop down, then they're talking like numbers, and some of us are making more than they basically assumed all of us would quit so the new owner could come and like so I feel like this should all connect, but either way what I'm trying to say is it's like this push to uplift America, but like, and then they talk about like individualism, but it doesn't make any sense. It seems like the only way that I can take care of myself is to join the military. In my head, I'm like, oh, the military will take care of me. They will feed me. They will make sure I have an education. But I don't believe in fighting for America. Um, and yes, I'll leave it at that. Sorry, I'm really bad with talking, but I'm trying to get better at it. And that's another thing. And it's like the people that I know are in the military. I know everybody's experiences are different, but like so far, because I go to a school where a lot of students are in the military, they're like, they always have such great things to say about it. And thinking about my dad when I forgot his name, when he kneeled when they were when they had when it was time for the Pledge of Allegiance, my dad hated that. He also didn't understand and hated Black Lives Matter. He was like, I agree, all lives matter. And I'm like, is this because you were in the military? And did the military like low key? I have this theory. It's not, I know it's not true, but I have a theory that people in the military are slightly brainwashed. But that's just like my own way of thinking, just slightly in terms of just with how much they put America on this pedestal, um, without like criticizing people, of course. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm very unorganized through talking.
Oh, that was great. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's also like propaganda is very complex. So that's why I said this is like an intro to propaganda. So like your dad kneeling during the Pledge of Allegiance, but also like hating Black Lives Matter. Like people are very complex as well. They can believe different things at the same time. Um, but I also think like I think also just the cultural individualism in America kind of just causes most people to see anyone else's failure to appreciate America as a moral failing, even though America does have this system that requires people to join the military if they want any type of security. You know, my parents were in the military because it got them out of like the lower income bracket. And, you know, while there are ways in which we can benefit from America, I mean, there's also ways in which we don't benefit from America. I mean, we all saw like what happens when you don't comply with the military or the police that Trump is setting out on people now. So it's a complex state of mind to be in, to know that there is intentional propaganda that doesn't seem intentional at first. But at the same time, you can also believe in America in your own way. I've had a lot of interesting thoughts about how I feel about America recently, especially as I've been studying propaganda and recognizing where it is and what it is and why we all know the Pledge of Allegiance off the top of our heads. But at the same time, like I've been able to do things that I've done because my parents served in the military. So basically, what I'm trying to say is like two things can be true at the same time. Um, America can be helpful and harmful at the same time, and propaganda is neutral and it can be used in negative ways. Um, yeah, just long-winded way to say like I feel you, and there's a lot going on. I know it's already like 4 o'clock, and I don't want to take up too much of y'all's time unless anybody has anything else they'd like to say. Um, but I do have book recommendations that I have on screen here. All of these I've reviewed on my Instagram. So you can just scroll through and find them if you don't have time to read the whole book, but you just want like a brief covering of what each book is about. And they all go into how American history and American media have perpetuated certain narratives about America or about American people, um, and how this has affected uh, current politics. Um, yeah. So I'll send this PowerPoint to anyone who's interested if you want to go back and look through them.
I would love
And
that.
okay,
Me too.
great. These are the sources I use because I'm in academia. I'm in academia and I always have to cite my sources. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much it from me. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you learned something. Um, I hope you don't feel like you're in the Matrix or anything, because there's a lot more that I would love to teach about. But since this is just like a something I decided to do randomly this week, I'm happy to talk about it more. But for now, I hope those books and this presentation will help you think more about narratives, political narratives in America. Oh, 102.
Thank
Oh,
you so
like a
much.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much for coming. I love having the opportunity to yap about my studies. So I'm really glad you all came.
This is very cool. I learned a lot.
Yay. I'm glad. That's my goal because I hope one day to be a professor of these topics and I want to hurry up and get good at them.
You're on the right track, it seems.
Yeah.
Yay. I hope
Yeah.
so. We're already in Wisconsin. I better be good at it.
Love that.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. I'm going to shut down the Zoom meeting, and I have your emails from the registration, so I'll just send, I'll send the link to the PowerPoint to you. But
Yay. Well, thank you. I really
Awesome.
enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
absolutely,
you.
it was so nice.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.